All right, what was the first or beginning belief system, or really the kickstart of this study on premillennialism? Where do they begin? What is the first part of premillennialism as we discussed it last week? The Jews what? Rejected Christ. Remember it began, and you can look at the chart here, but the Jews rejected Christ. He came down with two purposes, one to die on the cross, and the other to set up a kingdom. They believe, premillennialists believe, that He failed to set up that kingdom, and so He's going to come again and set up that earthly kingdom and reign here for 1,000 years. We then began to discuss Matthew chapter 24. We talked about the kingdom some. And by the way, what were the three stages of the kingdom? What was stage one? Okay, Israel. Stage one was Israel. What was stage two? Or what is stage two, we should say? The church. The church, and then finally the third stage of the kingdom is heaven. Good. Church will be offered up, delivered to the Father in heaven, 1 Corinthians 15:24. And so we then discussed the signs, the alleged signs from Matthew 24, and we came to the conclusion clearly from Jesus' teaching that those signs, if you will, those rumors, those wars, all those details were in reference to the end of what? Jerusalem. Good. Jerusalem, not the end of the world. And so that leads us to tonight as we talk about beginning the rapture. Three primary things we're going to discuss. Time permitting, I'd like to get through it all. The rapture, the Battle of Armageddon, and then finally the 1,000-year reign. We'll look at Revelation 20 and get into the literal, figurative, all of the details there, and see if we can hash through that a little bit and see what's going on. Let's begin with the rapture. Somebody tell us in your own words, or remind us, what is the rapture in the eyes of these premillennialists? When they use that term, what are they referencing? Okay, good. They're talking about the 1,000-year reign. And before that 1,000-year reign takes place, Christ is going to rapture the saints. What does that mean? Yeah, take them up to be with Him. And remember, they're going to stay with Him how many years during the tribulation? 7 years. 7 years, broken up into two halves, 3.5 years each. There'll be a time of tribulation in which the wicked will be persecuted, and then He'll come back after that 7 years, and there's a lot more details there that we won't get into, but He'll come back after that 7 years and reign for 1,000 years with the saints on earth. And then, of course, the final judgment will take place after that. So the rapture. Now let's look at the worksheet here. I want to make sure, someone mentioned that, it was hard. I wasn't doing a good job with making sure you're keeping up with me on these blanks. So I want to make sure that I don't lose you with these blanks. I want you to get them down. Letter A there. The belief is that Christians will be with the Lord during a time of tribulation. There, the blank. The belief is that Christians will be with the Lord during a time of tribulation. Additionally, those who believe in the rapture say it will be done in secret. The blank there. It will be done in secret. That's very interesting. Let's turn to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. This is where this doctrine comes from, they allege. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. When I say they, I'm not talking about a particular denomination necessarily. I'm just talking about anyone who believes in the premillennial theory. And if you turn on the television, if you go to many of the denominations, let's be honest, just about anywhere you go that is teaching on this subject, they're probably going to be taking this view of premillennialism because it is the most common belief. It is what's being, the media is all into this. The movies, it's coming out, the books, the Left Behind series, very popular. All of those things that are pushing this into the minds of both people young and not so young. 1 Thessalonians 4, though, it's interesting that they say this rapture is going to be done in secret, because what do you know Paul says about this rapture? We'll call it that. 1 Thessalonians 4, 13 through 17. Is it going to be in secret? Not at all. What two things jump out to you there that let you know this is not going to be some private, silent, quiet situation? Shout, number one, and there's going to also be the sound of a what? Trumpet. Shout and trumpet. Those are your blanks there. Paul says there will be a shout and a trumpet. All right? I was a trumpet player for some 13 years, and you don't have to be a trumpet player to know this, but a trumpet, true or false, is a very quiet instrument. False. You know you're not. And if you're in the marching band and you play something other than a trumpet, you don't like the trumpets because they are high and they are loud and they like to take control, and they're known for being, anyways, we could go all into that, but trumpets are loud instruments. They're not quiet. We're not talking about, whatever a quiet instrument would be considered as. Maybe, a flute. There's not any flute players. I was thinking flute, but I didn't want to say it. But since Larry said it, I'll agree. The flute, probably not quite as loud as an instrument like a trumpet. But this is not going to be done in secret, not at all.
Well, it starts out here in 13. It says, I don't want you to be ignorant about this, so I'm going to tell you.
That's exactly right.
And this is where they miss it. They mark that word out or something.
Well, apparently, they'd look right over it because, and speaking of that, Stan brings up a good point. What is the actual context here? What is Paul dealing with? He is talking about the second coming, but his focus is not on the details of the second coming. His focus is on making sure that these Thessalonians know what?
That he is coming back.
Okay, that he's coming back, but what are they concerned about? He says, I don't want you to be ignorant about this, concerning those who what? Sleep. Exactly. Apparently, those in Thessalonica were concerned about their brethren that had passed away, that were buried. And so Paul says, let me explain to you why you don't need to worry about them. In fact, he says the dead in Christ will rise first. That's what he's talking about. But of course, he does give us some details about the second coming. Notice letter C there. Secondly, this contradicts the blank there. I skipped letter B, didn't I? See, this is probably why some are saying, hey, you need to slow down. First of all, Paul says, so shall we blank be with the Lord. What goes there? Ever. We will ever. Not he's going to come back down and drop you back off at earth for a while, for 1,000 years. You're going to forever be with the Lord. That's what that word means. So shall we ever be with the Lord. Let's go to 2 Peter 3 and verse 12. 2 Peter 3 and verse 12. Somebody read that for us when you get there and if you're willing. 2 Peter 3 and verse 12.
Looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be dissolved, being on fire, and the elements will melt with perfect heat.
Okay, very good. Now, 1 Thessalonians 3:13, you see on the PowerPoint there, is where Paul mentions the coming of God or the coming of the Lord. That's what he's talking about in 1 Thessalonians 4, the coming of the Lord. Over and over again, he's using that in connection with this, what they're calling the rapture. But according to Peter's account, okay, the coming of the Lord marks the end of what? Good. The end of time, the end of the world. Specifically, what is going to happen to the earth when Jesus comes again and raptures His saints?
Things are going to melt together.
They're going to melt. It's going to burn up. It's going to be gone. There's not going to be an earth for Christ to come reign on for 1,000 years, or His saints, or for the wicked to remain. And so it contradicts the blank there, letter C. Secondly, this contradicts Peter's account. The coming of Jesus is the end of this earth. It is the end. We understand that the earth will melt away with fervent heat, and there will be a new earth, a new Jerusalem. Right? You see that word new used a lot, symbolic of that heaven where we will dwell for eternity. All right, another text, John 5 and verse 28. Let's go over there. If you have questions or thoughts, go ahead and at any point in time, raise your hand, let me know, and I'll slow down and we'll talk about it. If not, we'll just keep moving right along. John 5, 28 and 29. Thirdly, the blank will be raised with the righteous, according to Jesus. Somebody read that for us and tell us what you think goes in the blank. John 5, 28 and 29. Anyone that's willing.
Do not marvel at this, for the hour is coming in which all who are in the graves will hear His voice and come forth, those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation.
Good. According to John's account, according to what Jesus said, when the good are raised from their graves, who else will be raised? The wicked, the evil. Either one would fit the blank there. The evil or the wicked will be raised with the righteous. That, again, contradicts what these premillennialists are teaching as to what they think Paul was saying there in 1 Thessalonians. It's not that the wicked will be left behind, but he does add another detail to the church at Thessalonica. Just because of their question, their concern, he says, in fact, I'll have you know that the dead in Christ will be raised first. They're all going to be raised, but the dead in Christ will be raised first. A great detail there. John 5:28 and 29. All right, wicked there or evil, the blank. Letter E. Fourthly, this doesn't fit in with the last blank principle. Look at the next chapter over. John chapter 6. John chapter 6, verse 39. And this is the Father's will which has sent me, that of all which He hath given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up again the what day? The last day. He's going to raise it up the last day. Look at verse 40. And this is the will of Him that sent me, that everyone which sees the Son, that believeth on Him, may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. Verse 54, whoso eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood hath eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. All right, what is he saying over and over again about the day in which that resurrection will happen? It's called the what day? Last day. Right? If it was beginning a 1,000-year reign on earth, I don't see how it could be the last day. And if that's not enough, add to that John chapter 12 and verse 48. I'll read it to you. John 12 and verse 48. Listen to this. He that rejecteth me and receiveth not my words hath one that judges him. The word that I have spoken, the same shall judge him in the last day. According to Jesus, in case there was any lack of understanding, any confusion with this, according to Jesus, what is going to happen on this last day? Judgment. Judgment. There is no millennial reign after Christ comes again. When they come out of those graves, that's it. It is the last day, and on that last day, there will be judgment. So look at the blanks here, letter E. Fourthly, this doesn't fit in with the last what principle? Last day. Last day. The day we are raised from the graves is the last day. The day we are raised from the graves is the last day, and furthermore, the last day is when we are judged. Very good. The last day is when we are judged. John 12 and verse 48. All right, any other thoughts or questions about the rapture? At least 4 points there that I think refute that, and there may be others that I haven't mentioned.
These people have no idea what happens between death and judgment, do they?
There's a lot of confusion, isn't there? There really is.
Well, there is for them, not for me.
Yeah.
The man
Well,
Lazarus, there was no question about what happened.
yeah, and to be fair, I guess would be the way to put it. But you know, a lot of these people have been just raised their whole life believing what their parents believe, like we talked about Sunday, believing what their preachers told them, and just nobody has opened their eyes, and they haven't studied for themselves and seen that's right, or they've studied it and they're looking at it through those premillennial eyes and not with an open mind. Yes, sir.
What I hear mostly from the denominational people is the part about up in the clouds with Christ.
Yes.
My sister uses that as their part of their rapture theory. That's why
Yes.
it's going to happen.
And true or false? We're going to meet the Lord in the air. True. But what does the text never identify happens next? Where does He go? Once you meet with Him in the clouds, there's no indication that He ever goes any farther than that, as I heard it put by one preacher. He doesn't go down any farther than the clouds. Jesus is done with physically being in this world, on this planet, if you will. The farthest or closest He's ever going to get again is those clouds, and it's to meet us halfway. It's to meet us halfway. And the reason He's doing that, I believe, is part of that picture of the marriage. You remember in the Jewish customs, the betrothal period, what would the groom do when it was time for the marriage to be consummated? He would go, and that's right, he would go and pick up the bride. He would go and meet her with his procession. with the best man and then bring her back to his house. That's what Jesus is doing. The Holy Spirit, the angel, the archangel, I believe it is going to shout the trumpet of God. There's the procession, and he's bringing us home to the mansions. John 14, I believe, where he talks about making that room for us, making those mansions.
Where do they get these ideas of the tribulation?
Well, the tribulation, those kinds of things, a lot of that comes from Daniel and Revelation. There's some references to tribulation in the New Testament, but most of those are not really misunderstood as far as, we're going to go through tribulation here on earth as Christians, but a lot of that comes from misinterpreting some of the symbolism in Revelation and in Daniel. That's where they get it. The tribulation in particular is mainly from Daniel, is where, at least from what I'm understanding, where they're getting that. Because it's not there, ultimately, but where they're thinking they're getting that is from these prophecies, this figurative language, symbols, signs that are coming from these books. Yes, sir?
I have always wondered about when we come back in the clouds, we look up in the sky and see clouds over Jacksonville Beach. What about the people over in Europe or Africa, South America?
That's a good point. That's a good point. What does it say about us? Every eye shall see him. So in some sense, he's going to, and it could be, we think of him as just a fleshly being that would, as a man. And truth be told, when Paul speaks to Timothy, he identifies Christ as still being a man, which is an interesting, a whole other topic. But nonetheless, I imagine there's going to be I don't know if it'll be a bright light. I don't know if it'll just be a miraculous thing, but every eye is going to see him. And you're exactly right. I've never even thought about that before. Is it going to be over the United States? Is it going to be over China? Or, where's it going to be? That's a great point. The clouds probably doesn't literally mean our clouds necessarily. Maybe just would identify with up there somewhere. I don't know. It's a great question, though. One I definitely don't know the answer to.
But you have to think about how small this earth is in this whole realm that God created, and how easy it would be for God to let everybody see him at the same time.
That's true.
I mean, how easy is it to believe that?
Yeah.
To me, it's no problem.
Yeah, I mean, if it's not like he can't do it. How he'll do it, I don't know, but he can do it. That's a great question, though.
People who've been dead for thousands of years are going to see him.
Yep.
And, if that's the case, then those that are on earth at the time can all see him at the same time.
Mm-hmm. You've also got the fact that they're in the spirit realm, and yet they're going to be back in their bodies, so to speak, when they're raised up out of that. And so, do they go back into the bodies literally? Do they just come out of paradise? There's so many things there that we just don't know. But boy, it poses some great thoughts and contemplations.
Hope we come out of paradise.
Yeah, we're not going to stay there. That's for sure.
Because our bodies are decayed; they're gone.
Yeah, we don't want to see those things again, do we? All right, let's go to Revelation 16. Great questions, great thoughts. Revelation 16. You can, that basically is just part of your chart there, but if you can see that, you can look on your page, and now we're going to move past the rapture. We're going to skip the tribulation part of this, mainly because before too long I'd like to do a study in the book of Daniel. Lord willing, maybe even sometime next year, and we'll get into that at that point when we get to that chapter 9 of Daniel. But let's jump ahead right here to the second coming of Christ, which is supposed to happen at the or right after the Battle of Armageddon, according to the premillennial theory. Romans 16 and verse 16. You may kind of laugh, but this is the only place it's ever mentioned, and this is the text that people read, and they have decided that this means there's going to be a great war, right? That's going to take place before this second coming. Romans 16 and verse 6, Revelation 16:16. Somebody read that for us. Very good. That's it. That's the verse. And from that passage, many have derived that there's going to be a great war. Now, let's stick to the sheet here so I don't get ahead of myself. Letter A. The belief is that a great what will take place just before Christ's reign. Great war, exactly. This belief is that there's going to be a great spiritual war and earthly war that's going to take place before Christ's reign.
They don't think there's a war going on now, do they?
Well,
They think that spiritual war is going to wait until then.
yeah, I mean, they would. I guess if you show, I mean, there's plenty of verses that talk about the spiritual warfare in a sense always going on. That we're battling with spiritual beings right now. Ephesians talks about. So, to some degree, they'd have to agree with that, I imagine. But this is a special, I guess, war. They would say, special battle that's going to take place. Look at back at the prior verses. All right, here's the problem. You're right. We don't even have to get into all the details, and talk about what these symbols do mean. But the problem with so many in the book of Revelation is that they're taking all of these things to be so literal. They're making them out to be exactly what they say. And let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, Romans 16:16, Armageddon, okay? A great battleground. We'll talk about it in a moment. But let's go back up to verse 13 and let's read this literally, okay? If Armageddon is a literal war that is going to take place, let's be consistent and go back to verse 13. He says, and I saw 3 unclean spirits. And by the way, throughout the book of Revelation, the simplest way I know to put it is, Revelation is almost like a big drama on a stage, a big act that has a lot of consistent scenarios, including 7 activities over and over and over again. And there's an intermission period, and it's really interesting to break it down the way it's set up. But here's another set of 7 instances, and these are bowls that angels are pouring out. And to make it as brief as I can, they talk about a bowl that has to do with the sea, a bowl poured out that has to do with the earth, the sun, and he's talking about all these natural disasters of the world. And then he's going to talk about the corruption that will affect them. And I believe this to be talking about the Roman Empire. And so there's a lot of connections there with what took place. And so this is after the 6th bowl is poured out in verse number 12. He references the great river Euphrates. Now look at verse 13. And I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. All right? Verse 13, do you think there's literally going to be frogs out of literal mouths with a literal dragon, a literal beast, and a literal false prophet? No. Now there is a view out there, it's not the most common one, but there is a view out there that does take this literal, and it's an interesting study, and it's incredible that really some of the things that they get from this. But we can, for example, we can know beyond a shadow of a doubt what that dragon is. There's a lot of these details that John, by inspiration, just tells us what they symbolize. Revelation 12, anybody know what the dragon symbolizes? The dragon is Satan. He tells us, Revelation 12, I think it's verse 9, the dragon is Satan. There's no debate on that. There's no issues. We don't have to try to figure it out. There it is. And so right off the bat, we know this dragon is symbolic. The beast and the false prophet, or the second beast, is also symbolic. We could get into what those represent, but that won't necessarily behoove us for this study. Verse 14, though, let's keep going. These are figurative things. If you take the Roman Empire view, you're going to think of that beast as the Roman Empire, the false prophet as the cult of emperor worship. Verse 14, for they are the spirits of devils, working miracles which go forth unto the kings of the earth and the whole world to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty. Okay, it does mention battle there, verse 14. We'll admit that. Verse 15, behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. Okay? Here's the point here. Look at back to your worksheet. First of all, everything prior to verse 16 is very, what do you think goes there? Symbolic or figurative, either one. Very symbolic, very figurative. Furthermore, in our timeline, whether you believe this is the destruction of Jerusalem, whether you want to date it earlier, whether you want to believe this is Roman Empire, or even the Catholic Church, some take that view, whatever you want to believe, when you're in chapter 16, your timeline, you're not yet to the end of the world. You're not to Judgment Day yet. That's not fitting into the timetable. And so, furthermore, that letter I there under B, number 1, chapter 16 is not yet discussing the end. This is not about the end. This is not about when Jesus comes again. We'll talk about where it is in the timeline in a moment. Therefore, the next one, Armageddon most likely is symbolic. It is symbolic. It's not literal. It is figurative. It is symbolic. And so the question is, of course, what? What does it symbolize? What does it mean? Obviously, if you talk to somebody about this, they're going to say, okay then, what does it mean? All right, well, I think we can come to a pretty good conclusion. Letter C. Let's start with the simplest thing and just discuss what that word literally means. Armageddon would literally translate into, anybody know? Mount of Megiddo. Mount of Megiddo. Would literally translate into Mount of Megiddo. In fact, the next letter there, the Valley of Megiddo, or the Valley of Jezreel, Jezreel, Megiddo is the same. I'm going to show you a map in a minute, was a famous battleground for Israel. A very, very famous and common battleground for Israel. Very many battles, many deaths, many notable activities from the Old Testament took place at Megiddo. It is a very famous battleground. For example, let's go to Judges chapter 4. We're not going to turn to all these examples, but I'm going to turn to one, and then I'll mention the others to you, some of them, just to show you how common Megiddo is used during Israel's time. Judges 4, verses 15 and 16. Judges 4 is about Israel's only female judge, which would be who? Deborah, Israel's only female judge. Deborah went against Sisera, as you recall. Look at verse, what do I have there, 15. The Lord discomfited Sisera and all his chariots and all his hosts with the edge of the sword where Barak, so that Sisera lighted down off his chariot and fled away on foot. Notice verse 16. So Barak pursued after the chariots and after the host unto Harosheth of the Gentiles, and all the hosts of Sisera fell upon the edge of the sword, and there was not a man left. Everyone died at this location, at this point, other than Sisera. Remember, he ends up in the tent and gets the tent peg driven into his head when he's asleep. That's a rough way to go right there. But chapter 5 is the key. It doesn't tell us in chapter 4 where this happens, but when Deborah sings this song of victory in chapter 5, she mentions the location of this battle. Verse 19. The kings came, read it with me, and fought the kings of Canaan to Taanach, by the waters of what? Megiddo. They took no gain of money. All right, look up here on the screen if you can see this. Megiddo is right there on the map. Megiddo. This little dot at the end of that arrow is Megiddo, back in this time, of course. The river there, Kishon, doesn't it mention the river in verse... Well, it mentions the waters. It does mention the river somewhere, and I just didn't make note of it. I apologize. But the river that she mentions, Kishon, runs right through here, through this valley of Jezreel or the valley of Megiddo. Mount Tabor, where they're coming from, Israel begins here, and the Philistines are here in Megiddo, and they're going to battle right here in between the two in what's called the valley of Jezreel or the valley of Megiddo. Same idea. Megiddo was to the south, Jezreel was to the north. And so this battle, according to Deborah, took place at Megiddo. All right, Judges chapter 4. There's several others that we could mention. For example, Judges 6:33. Who defeated the Midianites with 300? This is just good Bible things to know. Gideon. Excellent. Gideon, the blank there. Deborah defeated Sisera. Gideon defeated the Midianites here in Judges 6. That's also where it took place. The valley of Megiddo. Megiddo was a mountain, and the plain around it was known as the Valley of Megiddo. Saul and Jonathan died here. The Philistines, remember, slinging those arrows. Saul and Jonathan died, 1 Samuel 29, 1, 11, and chapter 31 as well. There in Megiddo as well. All right, once you've got those filled out, flip it over. One more example I'll give you. And again, when you have some time, turn to each of these and see for yourself. And there are many more than what I'm giving you. King Ahaziah and Josiah also died here. 2 Kings 9:27 is Ahaziah, that is Ahaziah. And 2 Kings 23 that you see there is Josiah, Josiah. Over and over and over again. And there are many more that we could reference where battles took place, where kings, men of God, men that weren't of God, died again and again. All right? So why would God mention that there's going to be an Armageddon or a battle and use Armageddon or the Mount of Megiddo as a reference?
The Jewish community understood what reference he was using.
Exactly.
They could relate to.
Exactly. Have you ever heard somebody say he met his Waterloo? Have you ever heard that before? What do they mean when they say that? They met their end. What is that a reference from? A famous what? Battle. Who was in that battle? Who? Napoleon. I don't know what I heard over there, but it didn't start with an N. I know that. Was that Louis Bone over there? Tell you what. They hadn't put you in asylum yet. No, we're talking about Napoleon. So when somebody says they met their Waterloo, everybody knows what that means. They're talking about this great battle. Couldn't John, by inspiration, have used that as a symbol that would have meant the very same thing to the Jews in the first century? Absolutely. And that's exactly, I believe, what's taking place. All of that language is figurative language there. Nothing literal about that. And so there was a message. All right? Now, what was that message? Let's go to Revelation 20. Any other thoughts on that before we keep going here? Yes, sir.
They also use Matthew 24, there'll be wars and rumors of war.
Yes.
In relation to Armageddon.
Yeah, that's true. That's exactly right. And again, we've already taken note that that is in the timetable of the destruction of Jerusalem. But you're exactly right. And for those who take the view just before AD 70 there, with the writing of Revelation, you could see how they would fit that in with that as well. All right, Revelation chapter 20. This is probably where most of the confusion comes from, because this symbolic language can really mislead, can really throw some people off if they're not looking at this through first century eyes. Revelation 20 verses 1 through 6. Everybody caught up to this point on the sheet? Have I left anybody? Missing any blanks? Okay, good. All right, Revelation chapter 20. We're talking now about this 1,000-year reign on your chart from Revelation 20. Oh, wrong way. All right. Now, the belief is that Christ and His saints will literally reign for the blank there, 1,000 years, of course. The belief is that Christ and His saints will literally reign for 1,000 years. Let's read Revelation 20, verses 1 through 6. Revelation 21 through 6. Let's read it together. Here's where they get this. And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. By the way, it's also right here in Revelation 20 and verse 2. I forgot about that one. The dragon is identified as Satan. He's also identified as the old what? The old serpent. What is that a reference to? There you go. Some say it doesn't say that it's Satan. Well, Revelation 20 and verse 2, I believe it does. Verse 3, let's keep going. And cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. After that, he must be loosed a little season. It's a very important part of this. So here's what he's saying. Okay, we'll talk about what he means in a minute. What he's saying is that Satan is going to be bound in chains in some pit, bottomless pit, for 1,000 years. Okay? Verse 4. John says, And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them, and I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus, and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their heads or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ, 1,000 years. There's that reference to reigning with Christ 1,000 years. Also notice again the beast mentioned there. They're worshiping this beast. Some believe that's the Antichrist. If you believe this is the Roman Empire, it certainly makes sense, as these emperors demanded their worship, and of course the consequences if you did not bow down or pay that homage. Verse 5, But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power. They shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. All right, there's the text, verse 6. That's what it says. Now let's talk about what it means. All right, look at your worksheet here. First of all, we need to notice who will reign with Christ. If this is literal now, this is literally 1,000 years, let's look at who. is going to reign. Let's see if this actually fits. And by the way, whoops, I already told you. And by the way, any time in Revelation when somebody comes to you and says this is literal, 9 times out of 10, not always, but 9 times out of 10, all you need to do is look at a few verses before or after it and show them that all that would be literal too, and you'll probably make the point. Because most of the time it's figurative, and everything around it is figurative. For example, 144,000. Some say that's literal. Well, guess what? According to Revelation, those are males who are virgins. Okay? Unless you're a male or a virgin, if that's literal, you don't get to be in heaven. Ladies, you're wasting your time. Married men, you're wasting your time. It's not literal, it's figurative. Right? 144,000, 12 times 12,000, the tribes of Israel. And so there's a symbol there. But nonetheless, let's talk about what we're trying to get to. First of all, notice who will reign with Christ. Did you notice the who there in verse number 4? Who is it that's reigning with Christ in this text, according to verse number 4? The Christians that died. Literally, the Christians that died in what way? They were martyred. They were beheaded. Okay? He's only talking about Christians who were beheaded for Christ. All right? If this is literal, what does that mean for us?
We're not going in.
We're not going in. We're not going to be part of that unless we were beheaded. Again, he's giving a message. Keep in mind, who is this written to? Written to the church in the first century. What was happening during AD 80s and AD 90s? And yeah, they were being persecuted. They were being beheaded for their faith over and over again. We could talk about Nero and Caligula and all of these names, all of these emperors and the things that they did to these Christians. All right, these martyrs, there is the blank. These martyrs are also seen in Revelation 6, 9 through 11. Maybe make note of that and check that out a little bit later. That's when they ask God, when are you going to avenge us? How long are you going to let this go on? All right, this book is written to them. This book is written to those in the first century who were enduring this. It was written to those in the first century, but about these martyrs and others who felt that way. And so the who here is not all Christians. It's not all saints. It's those who were beheaded for the cause of Christ. Are we really going to take that literally? In the second place, our time is almost up. Secondly, notice where they reign with Christ. Notice where they reign with Christ. Blank is not mentioned at all. What word is not mentioned as to the where they're going to reign with Him? Earth. Earth's not mentioned anywhere. There's no indication whatsoever in these 6 verses that Christ is going to do this on earth. It doesn't say that. In fact, I can assure you that this is not earth that we're talking about because, as you notice on the sheet, these are not bodies. What do I mean by that? He's talking about people who were martyred. They will reign with Christ. Who are these people who were martyred? Where are they now? Their soul is right. Is their soul still on earth? No, they're in the spirit realm. And so they're reigning with Christ, I believe, in a type of a celebration, a victory that's going to come. They're going to reign with Him. They're going to be excited, a time of joy as they're in paradise for these last days. But we'll get to that in a moment if time permits. Earth is not mentioned at all. These are dead souls, letter A, reigning with Him in the spirit realm. Earth is not mentioned. Regardless of, you could debate whether they're in the spirit realm or not, but earth is not mentioned. There's no evidence for that. And then finally, thirdly, notice when they reign with Christ. When they reign with Christ. All right, in our timeline here, as you go through the book of Revelation, we're talking about the end, here in chapter 19, we're talking about the end of the Roman Empire, I believe is what's going on here. And so the when here, literally, and again, in this timeline, we're not yet to the end. We're not to judgment just yet, although we're very close, and I'll show you that. It begins at the end of Rome based upon chapter 19, okay? Based upon chapter 19, verse 20 there of chapter 19, the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet, that's the first and second beast, that wrought miracles before him, which he deceived them. They had received the mark of the beast, and then that worshipped his image. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire burning with brimstone. And the remnant were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, which sword proceedeth out of his mouth, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh. Again, I know there's a lot of symbolism here. But let me show you how I know we're not to judgment just yet. Look down at verse number 3. Verse number 3. You notice there that after the 1,000 years is fulfilled, Satan, what's going to happen to Satan? He's going to be loosed for a little season, a little time. All right? Now, question. Once Satan is in the lake of fire, will he ever get out? No. This is not the lake of fire yet. He's somewhere, he's bound, and he's going to be able to be loosed for a moment. Now, our time is almost up, so let me make this very brief and as simple as I can. When Jesus was here in the first century, Satan, true or false, had more power than he does today. True. God allowed him to do things, just like when God allowed him to do extra things to Job, God allowed him to do things. In particular, he allowed what to take place that doesn't today? Demonic possession, a prime example. When Jesus died on that cross, Satan was bruised in his what? In his head, right? In the timeline, this fits the fact that Christ would have chained him up, would have held his powers in, so to speak, during the last days, the days we're in right now, right? After the end of Rome, some 75 AD, up until he comes again. Now, and it certainly fits. Look down at verse, and our time is about to be up. Look down at verse number 7. He's going to be loosed out of his prison. He's going to try to deceive Gog and Magog. He's going to try to do these things. But look at verse 10. And the devil that deceives them was cast into the what? The lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are. True or false, Romans in that Roman Empire died and is cast away already and is no longer in power today. Right? Everybody knows it. Back, centuries ago, right? They're, a couple anyways. They are gone. That is the Roman Empire we're talking about. And so, he is also cast in the lake of fire. So, last point. The little time seems to be Satan's transfer to what? To hell, to the lake of fire. In other words, he's loose for a season, and he wants to use that time to go do more damage, but why is he loosed out of that location? Because he's got to be put where? In hell. Eternal punishment in that lake of fire, this second death that he referenced. Right now, is Satan in the lake of fire? No. He's walking about, seeking whom he may devour. Does he have full power and authority? No, he's chained. He's limited, right? And the Roman Empire is done. These people are there right now, I believe, celebrating that it's over. God's vengeance has been done. The Roman Empire has ceased. They're no longer in power. And now, of course, or when Christ comes again, rather, it will be completely and utterly finished. I know our time is up. Any quick questions or thoughts? That can be very confusing. And my time ran out very quickly. All right. Thank y'all so much. If you have other thoughts, come see me afterwards and we'll talk about it some more. God bless you. I hope we made some more sense of a difficult subject.